Hello everybody, this is Oliver and Chaotic Bibliophile. I had a joke planned about how I am a mess, but I fucked it up and I can't be bothered to re-record that. Let's get on with the video. It is mid-April already. I want to tell you about the books that I read in March, because if I don't do it, it will just pile up. I also want to say that my system of keeping track of books completely broke down. March was such a long month, and I had a couple of days where for either projects or just days with friends, or I went to Peckham and I saw some bookshops, I just got books that I didn't log on, and then it broke down. So, but I'm still also trying to keep my purchases down and just not go and get books unless I'm gonna read them right away, but also focusing on reading books that I own. So in light of that, I will be doing Springathon and I will be doing Mashed Potato May. I will leave the link to Springathon announcement by Natalie from Curious Reader, and then Mashed Potato May is something that Ariel and Raylene from Books About podcast host, which basically read books that you've been meaning to get to for a long time. And so I will leave the link to the episode where they announced that, which I think is the latest. Then again, I don't know when this will be up. Other than that, I have signed up to judge the second round of the Book to Prize, and I will speak a little bit more about that on the Book to Prize video, which is coming, I swear, wherein I review the 6 books that I read for round 1 and give you my rankings. March was a long month. It was a really mixed bag. Like, I had some incredible moments and I read some incredible things. I also read some not good things and had some not great moments. So mixed bag. We're here for it. It's fine. So let me just really quickly tell you about the books that I don't have a physical copy of, starting with Different for Boys by Patrick Ness. This is a really short book, let's call it a novella, I think we can say, about a kid who's gay and he has a weird secretive relationship with one of his friends, where the other friend does not consider himself gay and will not kiss him or admit that they are together, but they are effectively together. It has some pretty cool illustrations. I actually really enjoyed it. It's a kind of book that I would have liked to have read at that age. I found it really sweet and affecting, a little bit funny. It has a meta element that I really enjoyed. So they make a joke about what is censored throughout the book and what isn't, and I found it really enjoyable. I definitely recommend it if you're into YA, and I would also recommend it to gift as a present for a queer teen who likes to read slice of life stuff. Really well written. Also my first Patrick Ness. I know he's super popular, but I have not read his other work. I also read Lizzy and the Cloud by Eric Fan and Terry Fan, and this is just an adorable children's book. We have the hardcover version. It is one of the most stunning books about a girl who buys a cloud and makes it grow, but ultimately needs to set it free. I think it's just a lovely story with a great message, and I would definitely recommend it for children and will be gifting it. Then the Book to Prize books, which I can review now, although I won't review in depth because I want to do that for the other video. But I read His Name is George Floyd by Toluse, Olorunnipa and Robert Samuels. Why can't I say names? I apologize. This is great because it is not just a biography of George Floyd, who of course was murdered by a police officer in 2020. It also takes this as not even a starting point to talk about the fallout and Black Lives Matter movements and protests, but also links it to Floyd's ancestry and does a really, really good job of exposing or demonstrating, I think that's a good word for it, the structural inequalities and racism that affected not only George Floyd, but his entire community, and by extension, just the US structural racism and all the systems that foster it. It is truly great. It's really well written. It did make my selection. So yeah, I will say a little bit more about it in that review. But if you've been kind of hesitant, you think it would have been a bit of trauma porn or that it would be an over sensationalized account, rest assured it is not that. It is fantastic. And then I also read Keats' Brief Life in 9 Poems and 1 Epitaph by Lucasta Miller. And this was a big disappointment because I expected it to be great and it was not. It does what it says on the tin. It is a biography, but it has a really long introduction that actually serves as a mini biography. And so when you actually take the poems, it kind of makes no sense that they are a biography. And also Lucasta Miller is a great fan of Keats, which no shade to that. One of my favorite literature books is Maureen Corrigan's book on The Great Gatsby, and she is a big Fitzgerald fan. But in this case, Lucasta Miller just shades other writers and behaves as if Keats was just the pinnacle of poetry ever. It's just insane. I've never read anything like it. It's such a hagiography and the writing was really dull. So yeah, I didn't enjoy that one. And that one I almost bought. It was one of those that I almost got a physical copy of because it was a Keats biography. How could it lose me? There you go. Let's move on to physical books. So let's start with Feelings, A Story in Seasons by Manjit. And this could be described as a graphic novel. You'll certainly find it in the graphic novel section, but it's more, let's call it an illustrated journal. It is nonfiction. It is a look into anxiety and sort of her relationship with the seasons and how it affects her mood and how life goes on. It's not even a story, really. It's just a beautiful experience. I feel like it's the equivalent of listening to really good lo-fi, which I actually rarely do because too monotonous a lo-fi stresses me out. But like the one that makes it into nice video game music, that sort of thing, it's just so beautifully illustrated, and the reflections and the way it talks about anxiety, but also about love and that sort of first inkling of love, and also female friendship, and just the idea of living and living through our senses. And it's just such a lovely book. I really recommend it if this sounds like your thing because it won't disappoint you. Greek Lessons by Kang, which will be published on April 27th. I asked for a proof of this. It is my least favorite Kang, I will say that, and yet I loved it. So this is 2 stories. One is about a woman who is losing her voice. It's not anything physical with her. It's just a response of her body to certain things that have happened in her life. It's not the first time it happens. It's not that she can't comprehend language, but she cannot speak. But also her relationship to written language is quite interesting. And she attends these Greek lessons where the professor is losing his eyesight. And for, I would say, more than half the book, you don't really have a strong grounding in the narrative. You don't really understand what's going on beyond each of these characters. But after they finally address each other, let's say, everything that has happened before has become clear. The voices are quite disembodied and are telling a lot of different stories, and the chapters alternate but not in a strict pattern. So there's a lot of things going on, and I think it won't be to everyone's taste. It's certainly much quieter, but it shares the same concerns with sort of the body and the senses and language and how all of those intertwine. It was just really fascinating. There is not much in the way of plot, but it's still so engrossing, and I didn't want to stop reading it, and I thought it was so beautiful. So this is translated by Deborah Smith and Emily Yewon, and they did a terrific job. So yeah, I really recommend this if you've liked Kang's previous books. However, if you haven't checked her out yet, and you want to give her only one shot, I know The Vegetarian is her biggest one, but go with Human Acts. Human Acts is just... Then I read that Old Country Music, stories by Kevin Barry, and Kevin Barry is just one of my favorites. He's an Irish author who is a really big deal in contemporary Irish letters. The stories feel so fresh. I will say that compared to some other collections, I feel like this is not that strong. Dark Lies the Island might be my favorite. However, there was still a lot of stories that I found fascinating, and I like that he's experimenting. Like, not all the stories work that well, but I prefer him just trying stuff out instead of just having all the stories be the same story. I really highly recommend you read Kevin Barry if you're interested in Irish literature now. And also, if you liked The Banshees of Inisherin, this is good. It's not set in that time, but it has that same sort of punch and energy behind it. Yeah, I really recommend it. One that I also really enjoyed was West by Carys Davies. So this is a really short historical novella, let's call it. It's about this father who, when he hears that big bones, possibly dinosaurs, have been discovered in Kentucky, he leaves his, I think it's sister. So he leaves his young kid to his, let's say, sister or maybe mom's care. He is a widower. It's again a dual story. You see the perspective of the child who grows up for a few, I don't think too many, but some years. She keeps thinking about her father and defending her father because everyone thinks he's a lunatic. And she's like, no, he's not. I will show you. And so she just really believes in him and she wants to find out more. So she does her research. And we also see his story, which is basically a Western adventure story. It was really good. It was really propulsive. The ending shattered me and I really enjoyed it. I think if you're looking for Western, but perhaps not as crude or as dense as, let's say, Cormac McCarthy, then maybe this is a good bet for you. One that was more lukewarm is My Father's Diet by Adrian Nathan West. I was really disappointed because this was not bad. This was okay. But I felt pretty disappointed by what I actually got. So this claimed it was going to be about this kid helping his dad become a bodybuilder, his previously estranged father. But that happens about here. And before that, there's a bunch of other stuff. So it's really about the relationship. It's one of those sort of comment on the cultural moment kind of books. This was published in 2022 and it already feels very dated. I think it said around 2010s or maybe before. I couldn't tell you now. I enjoyed the narrative voice, but it crawled towards a conclusion that was underwhelming for what it was. This could have been almost a short story. Like, the beginning of it was so mostly unnecessary. It's kind of one of those situations where I think the author is so enamored with his main character that he really wants us to get to know the character. I think the rationale behind it is that we will get so used to him that we will care about his problems. And I think that is generally true, but still, it was pretty much an abuse of my time. I would not recommend this, but I still liked it. It was not bad. It was just, I don't know, misdirected maybe is the word. Another book that almost counts as a DNF, I think this, I don't know if I shelved it as a DNF. This is Concerning My Daughter by Kim HyeJin, translated by Jamie Chang. And this is about a mother who works at a hospital and her daughter is a lesbian and also a bit of a deadbeat, and she requests to go back to live with her mother because she can't afford rent anymore. And the mother says okay, but the daughter ends up also bringing her girlfriend, and it's a very uncomfortable situation. I really had such high hopes for this. I thought it was going to be great because it starts with a look into aging. And I think that is the main problem, actually, that this book doesn't know whether it wants to be a meditation on aging and old age, a bit of a romp because of the mom working at this caring home, or also a big mother-daughter thing, or focus more on the daughter and the girlfriend's relationship with each other and to the mother, but also the dire economic state for millennials. But at the same time, it doesn't really offer commentary on that because the daughter, as portrayed by the mother, is quite selfish and quite spineless. So it's just a very weird mix of characters and choices, and it never came together for me. I just found it so dull and tedious. It was actively preventing me from reading because I wanted to finish it because it's so short. And then I was like, okay, well, but I don't want to read this. So I ended up reading nothing, which is one of the most annoying things ever. I hate it when that happens. So I was like, I am just going to see if the ending makes me want to read it. And it didn't. I actually do not remember it. So I was like, bye. Much more successful novel was Pyre by Perumal Murugan, translated from Tamil by Anirudhh Vasudevan. And this was nominated for the Booker International. It sadly did not make the shortlist. As you know, I'm reading through the long list. I'm going very slowly. The next book on my list is Time Shelter. Hopefully by the time this is up, I will have started that. This is basically about a couple from different castes that gets married and they go to live in his village. And he keeps maintaining that they are from the same caste. It's just that she's from a different village, but no one believes him. And so it talks about the ostracism that they face. To be honest, before this was nominated, I was not that excited about picking it up because I thought, okay, it's like a Romeo and Juliet sort of thing. But actually, it is so good. In terms of prose, the way the author takes quite a simple and seemingly third-person omniscient narration and then turns it into free indirect speech and free indirect thought and moves through sensibilities, it actually creates so much nuance. The tapestry of events and perspectives is so subtle, quite delicate, and yet quite powerful. Deceptively simple, I would say. And I just really, really liked it. It's full of great moments and you get where both are coming from. Extremely sympathetic to both of them, and especially the wife who is brought here and her doubts. It is horrifying. It has some really, really hurtful violence, but it is also fascinating. And I don't know, it was just such a quietly devastating book. And I really, really enjoyed it. I also think it's a book that will appeal to many different readers, perhaps unlike some of the other books on the long list. I would recommend it if it sounds like something you might enjoy. A book that I would also describe in terms of if you like this, you will like this other thing that is similar. The Secrets of Hartwood Hole, BookTube's own Katie from Books and Things novel. I went to the book launch of this. It was super nice. There was an amazing cake with the cover and I met a lot of really lovely people. So yeah, it was a really nice evening. I had read half of it by the time I went and I hadn't read the other half, and I haven't messaged her to say that I actually really, really enjoyed this. As you guys know, I don't read much historical fiction, and also I am not used to reading plot-heavy books. This is a historical gothic novel, and it's about this woman who at the beginning of the story is trying to find a job as a governess or as a caretaker, and she's running away from something. It's clear she has a secret, but we don't know what that is. And also she's a widower, so we have some inklings, but in the end, nothing turns out to be the way you expect. It has a lot of really, really good twists, and it's just a propulsive read. I think Katie has written a novel she would love to read. So if you like that sort of really propulsive, really fun, really interesting, well-constructed, plot-driven historical novels, you will love this one. Really so fun. And I read it, I think, in about 3 days. If you basically share Katie's taste on that regard, I think you will absolutely adore this. And now we move on to 5-star reads. I haven't given them 5 stars, I don't think, on the story graph, but in my heart, these are all amazing books. Let's start with George Saunders' Liberation Day. This is George Saunders' newest collection of short stories, which I think it's his first fiction book since Lincoln in the Bardo, which of course won the Booker Prize and is being turned into an opera. I love George Saunders. I love him as a human, as a writer, as a thinker. Swimming the Pond in the Rain was one of my favorite books of, I think, 2021. It's a book I hand sell all the time that I recommend a lot. But the thing is, a lot of people who love his nonfiction and love him in interviews don't like or necessarily expect his short fiction because it's a bit kooky, out of left field, and exploring like really interesting ideas, but in really weird, abrupt voices, and a lot of them are a bit ridiculous, but also I would not necessarily consider this weird fiction a la Jeff Vandermeer. It's just really, really interesting. He is so funny and so good and has just such a profound sense of sort of humanity. I think his interest in the characters in these situations is so profound that he always arrives at interesting conclusions. I will say some of the stories weren't as successful as others, but the ones that hit the hardest and the ones that weren't my favorites were still really good. I just really, really enjoy him. He's so playful. He also does a lot of low-key dystopian situations. A lot of the stories are also very quotidian, but you don't really know until you're halfway to the end or like right at the climax. You don't understand what's at stake or what's going on, and that's what makes them so fresh and surprising. So yeah, really recommend if you're in need of solid but not necessarily super traditional short stories. Speaking of not super traditional and things that have been imitated ever since they came out, The Argonauts by Maggie Nelson. So this is not my first Maggie Nelson, but this is definitely her most well-known work. It is a fragmented memoir of her experience becoming a mother, and it's also about her partner transitioning. And in that regard, it has been criticized because it is considered one of the most influential trans books, but it is not written by the trans man himself. But the memoir is not about that. It is. That is like a central part, but it's so much more about the general idea of identity and gender dynamics and queer politics. And this was published in 2015. So not that long ago, actually. I thought it might have been a little bit earlier, but it's still quite a while ago. So I think the territory and the terms and just the experiences that she's describing were much less explored at the time. I think now, although not necessarily in mainstream media, but if you go to sort of autofiction, essay writing sections, you will find a lot of books doing similar things, but not as well. So this takes me to my next point. Privileged as Maggie Nelson admits to be in the same book, I still think her perspective is just extremely valuable, and the way she engages with the quotes by many thinkers and artists that she shares here, and the way she's really, really honest about everything, or at least that's how it comes across. The way she's willing to profoundly analyze aspects of her erotic and emotional life in a way that a lot of people would be really, really uncomfortable with. And maybe she was, but she was willing to go there. And I think that's really valuable. She's also an amazing writer. I just really loved it. Her reflections on motherhood, on parenthood in general, on being queer, and again, her ideas of like identifying and being perceived by others and being perceived by oneself, all of it I found fascinating. I thought it's super readable. Again, it's written in this sort of fragmentary style that has been done a lot, but I think here it's done particularly well. And I love that she gives credit right away. Just the multiplicity of voices in here, all being sort of filtered through Nelson's own voice and experiences. And again, this book has been reviewed to death on BookTube because it is a bit of a BookTube darling for I feel like the people who read these sort of books, but rightfully so, it is incredible. I really loved it and I can't wait to reread it. I also read completely spontaneously A Far Cry from Kensington by Muriel Spark, introduced by Alice Smith. Curiously, I didn't love the introduction. I usually do love Alice Smith as a nonfiction writer as well as a commentator, but in this case it was a bit meh. Anyways, this is about a badass former editor, I think in her 50s or 60s. She's reminiscing about her life working in a publisher, and in particular she's reminiscing about this one incident that completely derailed her life. She basically fought with an author who she called a really rude name, and I just don't want to say what it is, not because I think it's outrageous, it's because it's so funny, and I feel like when she explains it in the book it's hilarious, so I'll just leave it at that. And all the ramifications of that. It is a lot about the publishing world and the power and politics of that world and work and solidarity. It features one of the most compelling casts of characters I've ever read. All of them are so iconic and so unique, including the narrator. Muriel Spark was just the real deal. I've read, I think, 3 of her novels now, which is not enough. I need to read everything she ever wrote. If you're looking for a funny, interesting, extremely well-written book about the publishing industry, you can't go wrong with this one. Also, I gotta say, these sort of Virago anniversary editions are very hit or miss for me. I don't know how I feel about the whole sort of pattern, nothing about the cover sort of concept in general. But this one, I don't know, I think the vibe, the energy actually matches the book quite well, and I just really liked it. It was really nice to hold and read. So yeah. And finally, a book that I've been gushing about for, I would say, weeks now, since I finished it. Boulder by Eva Balthasar, translated from the Catalan by Julia Sanchez. This is just so good. I'm actually writing a review of it for my bookshop blog, which is going on renovation, so I'm not going to link it down below yet, but next month that should be completely up and running and this review should be up. This was shortlisted for the Booker International and so far it is my contender. I know I haven't read the other books yet, but I really, really, really love it. It is about this woman, Boulder, who takes a job as a cook in a ship, and she spiritually feels like a pirate. She loves her freedom. She loves going to all these ports and going on an adventure and being really unmoored. But then when she's in Chile, yeah, this book opens with her being in Chile. She falls in love with a woman named Samsa, and they begin this really passionate, and everything Boulder believed about herself is sort of not torn apart, but sort of shifts. What I will say is that people usually describe what happens in the second part of the book, which is that they have moved to, I think, Iceland, and they are living together, and Samsa decides she wants to become a mother, and Boulder at first doesn't want to, but then when she finally agrees to it, she finds herself being pushed away from Samsa. They describe that as the central conflict of the book, and it is in a way, like it's definitely the driving force of the second, but it's not about whether Boulder wants to be a mother or not. It's much more about the challenges of domestic life, of whether one can choose to be sort of a lone wolf or like give in to a partner, the challenges of having an idea about ourselves and how we can make that fit with another person if we so choose, about tedium, about being so free-spirited and wanting to be so free and in movement all the time, but our world and sort of our relationship structure doesn't necessarily fit that. So it's so much more about Boulder than like motherhood, although that does come into play. I just think if you're expecting it to be a meditation solely on motherhood and what motherhood does, you will be very disappointed. That said, this is an amazing book. The nuance and the richness of the prose, even though it's quite sparse, like the sentences sometimes are really short and like to the point, very much embodying what Boulder is and the way she is. But that sort of is interspersed with these moments of true poetry. And I think that shows the passion in Boulder. And then how a book that is basically a character study and doesn't have a lot of plot becomes so compelling. It feels longer than it is, but not because it is a slog. It's actually the opposite, but because it feels like so much has happened, so much history, so many years. I just adored it. So yeah, that is it. Oh, I have a couple of DNFs, but I've been already speaking for too long and I need to edit this, and let's leave it at that. And then I'll talk about the DNFs for March and April, although so far there's been none. We'll see on the next video. I mean, not the next, because hopefully the next video will be their book to prize. Let me know how you've been faring and what you've been reading in the comments down below. And of course, also if you've read any of these books or you want to read them after hearing me talk about them, also let me know. My brain is already just like out. I'm gonna go read now, and that's it. See you next time. I'll take this chance to also take my thumbnail. Okay. Spoilers. I've done that a lot. Should I? That's the thumbnail right there. Okay.